Quick question before we start. Have you ever gotten paid, felt genuinely relieved for about 48 hours, and then spent the rest of the month bracing for the next check like it was a lifeline? Here's the strange part. Study after study shows that most people who get a raise don't actually end up with more breathing room a year later. Somehow, the spending just expands to match it. This is the story of a woman named Denise, a night shift hospital cafeteria worker who spent almost a decade believing her problem was that she simply didn't earn enough. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, a conversation with a stranger in a parking lot rearranged everything she thought she knew about money. If you like stories about real financial turning points, not hacks, not overnight riches, just honest turning points, go ahead and subscribe now, because this channel is built entirely around them. Denise was 31, working nights at a hospital cafeteria in a mid-sized town in North Carolina. She wasn't cutting corners on effort, quite the opposite. 12-hour shifts, on her feet the whole time, home by 7 a.m. most mornings smelling like a deep fryer, sleeping through half the daylight just to do it again that night. Her paycheck landed every other Friday, a little under $1,900 after taxes. Enough to survive, never enough to feel like she was actually moving forward. She shared a two-bedroom apartment with her cousin to split the rent, drove a car with well over 150,000 miles on it, and had gotten disturbingly good at stretching a grocery budget. And still, by the second Thursday of every pay period, her account balance had a way of sliding toward zero, like it was on a schedule of its own. Denise had a phrase for it, one she used with her cousin so often it became a running joke between them. "It's not that I don't have money, it's that money doesn't have me. It just passes through." Here's the part she didn't talk about as openly. Payday itself had become its own kind of event. The second that direct deposit landed, something in her would loosen. She'd order delivery instead of cooking. She'd finally buy the skincare set she'd had sitting in an online cart for 2 weeks. She'd Venmo a friend for concert tickets she couldn't really justify. None of it felt reckless in the moment. Each purchase, on its own, seemed completely reasonable. But roughly 10 days later, reality would show back up right on schedule. Account balance in the double digits. A full week left until the next check. More instant noodles than she'd ever admit to buying in bulk. One night, walking to her car after a shift, she did the math in her head and realized she'd bought coffee from the vending machine every single day that pay period, nearly $40 total, while a full container of instant coffee sat unopened in her cabinet at home. It wasn't the $40 itself. It was the fact that she hadn't even noticed she was doing it. The turning point came on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, in, of all places, a grocery store parking lot. Denise was loading bags into her trunk when she overheard raised voices 2 cars over. An older man was arguing with someone on the phone, clearly a landlord based on what she could piece together. "I told you already, the deposit doesn't come back if you break the lease early. You signed the paper. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them." A pause, then quieter. "Look, I get it. But I'll figure it out isn't a plan. It's just a hope with better PR." The man hung up, visibly frustrated, and caught Denise watching. He gave a tired half-smile. "Sorry you had to hear that. My tenant's a good kid, works constantly, just never once sat down and actually planned past the next 15 days. Denise nodded politely and finished loading her groceries. But that line stuck to her the rest of the drive home. Works constantly, never once sat down and planned past the next 15 days. She sat in her parked car outside her apartment for a long moment before going inside, running an uncomfortable comparison in her head. She worked constantly too, and if she was honest with herself, her own financial planning horizon didn't extend much further than get to the next check. That night, instead of scrolling her phone before bed like usual, she opened her laptop and typed something she'd never bothered typing before. How to actually budget on a low income. The first article she read wasn't flashy. No secret formula, no one trick, just a blunt line that stopped her mid-scroll. Most people don't have a money problem, they have a plan problem. And a plan is cheaper than you think. She sat with that sentence longer than she expected to. The next payday, instead of the usual order in and unwind ritual, Denise sat down with a legal pad and wrote out every single expense from her last 3 pay periods, pulled straight from her banking app. Rent, car insurance, groceries, the vending machine coffee she'd never once tracked, delivery apps, a subscription she'd forgotten she still had. Adding it up was uncomfortable. Nothing on the list was a bad purchase on its own. Together, they were the entire reason she never got ahead. Her cousin noticed the legal pad on the counter. "What is this? Are you starting a business?" Denise laughed. "No, I'm starting a budget. Turns out that might be the actual business." If any part of this feels a little too familiar, that's the point. Pause for a second and think about which single habit, if you're honest with yourself, is quietly running your own bank account for you. Drop it in the comments if you want. You're definitely not the only one. And if you're finding this useful, go ahead and hit subscribe. We're just getting to the part where things actually start to shift. The first month with an actual plan felt almost boring. She made coffee at home. She canceled the subscription she'd forgotten about. She still went out occasionally. She wasn't trying to live like a monk. But now she decided in advance what she could spend on a given week, instead of finding out by accident when her balance hit 0. She kept at it. Some weeks she slipped. An impulse order here, a treat-yourself purchase there. And she stopped beating herself up over it, because the book she eventually picked up, an actual library copy borrowed on a whim months later, made a point she kept coming back to. Progress isn't a straight line. Consistency, tracked honestly, beats perfection every time. By month 4, something happened that hadn't happened in years. She reached payday with money still sitting in her account. Not a lot, about $60. But she stared at that number on her banking app for a solid minute, because it had genuinely never happened before. She started small, really small. A separate savings account she couldn't easily access from her phone. An automatic $25 transfer on payday before she could talk herself out of it. It felt almost pointless some months, but she remembered that line, "A plan is cheaper than you think." Years passed. Denise kept working the same job for a while because it paid the bills and she genuinely didn't hate it. But her evenings changed. She started picking up free personal finance content, then a community college night class on small business basics, mostly out of curiosity at first. Eventually, that $25 a week habit turned into a real emergency fund. The emergency fund gave her enough breathing room to take a part-time weekend gig doing meal prep for busy families in her area, something she started almost as an experiment, using skills she already had from a decade in food service. It grew slower than she expected. Some months, it barely covered its own costs. She kept at it anyway, because she remembered too clearly what it felt like to dread every payday instead of plan around it. Slowly, that side income became a second stream. The second stream became a small buffer. The buffer eventually became a down payment, not on anything flashy, just a modest condo, the first place that was fully hers. The day she got the keys, she stood alone in the empty living room for a long moment, thinking about every week she'd counted change for gas money, every time she'd quietly put something back on the shelf because she couldn't justify it. She didn't cry. She just felt, for the first time in a long time, like she wasn't bracing for anything. Her mother visited a few weeks later, walked through the small condo slowly, touched the counters, and finally said, quietly, "I used to lie awake worrying you'd never get out from under it all." She looked around once more. "I don't worry about that anymore." Neither of them needed to say much else after that. These days, people who know Denise don't think of her as someone who struggles with money. They think of her as the person who somehow always seems to have a plan, which is funny, because for the first 10 years of her working life, she didn't have one at all. A lot of people assume the real obstacle is simply not earning enough. Sometimes that's true, but often the actual gap isn't the size of the paycheck. It's the absence of a plan sitting underneath it. Denise's income didn't change first. Her habits did. She stopped trying to feel rich for 48 hours every 2 weeks and started quietly building something that would actually last. She learned, the slow way, that financial security isn't built in one payday. It's built in 100 small, boring, repeated decisions, most of which nobody ever sees or claps for. You don't need a six-figure salary to start. You just need to actually sit down once and look honestly at where your money's been going. Because a paycheck can cover this month. A plan can cover a lot more than that. So here's the question to sit with. The next time your paycheck lands, does it just pass through you again? Or does it finally start building towards something? Tell us in the comments, what's one expense you've never actually tracked? And are you willing to check? If this one hit home, subscribe for more stories like it and pass it along to someone who might need to hear it today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.